Okay, all right, we're going to begin. Who am I handing it off to? Just directly to Jamie or to you, Deborah?
Monday morning. So good morning, and thank you all for just all the hard work, both the applicants as well as City Council. This has been a long process, and I want to thank staff for all their work. Today, we are going to have a fairly lengthy conversation with you about where we are, what the staff recommendations are, which is a result of a lot of conversations that we've had with you all. So with that, I will turn it over to, I think I'm turning it over to Jamie first and then to Kim. And take it away, Jamie.
Yes. Thank you all, Mayor and council members, for being here. I'm Jamie Matthews. I serve as the assistant to the city manager. Is everybody good? Got what they need on their screens? Or okay. Okay. So I want to start off on also what Deborah said and thank the team that has been working on this. It's really been a team effort led by Kim Marmon-Sachs, who you'll hear from in a minute, Tony McDowell and the finance team, our IT department, CAPE, and many others, those who participated in the evaluation process. And again, it's just really been a team effort organization-wide to get to where we are. So with that. So just a quick overview. We'll go through some key takeaways. We'll do a review of how we got here. We'll provide some recommendations in time for discussion and next steps. So to start with some key takeaways, the funding requests, exceeded the amount allocated to the city. The ARPA guidelines are continuously being updated and interpreted. We used a pretty robust staff evaluation and scoring process, and the results from those evaluations and the conversations and feedback we've gotten from you all will lead to the recommendations that we will share later this morning. So the goals for today, again, will show how we got here, provide you all with draft recommendations and get some feedback and have some discussion. And that, again, that will inform the final recommendations that we'll bring back to you all at the May 10th council meeting. So timeline, it's about a year ago that the interim guidance for ARPA was released. Also at y'all's retreat last April, you named ARPA as one of your council priorities for this fiscal year. And throughout the rest of that summer, staff worked to understand that interim rule and provide information to you all at several work sessions. More key dates through the process. The city released the RFP in September. We received the applications and started the evaluation process throughout the end of that year and into January. And then also providing some updates to you all at work sessions along the way and at council meetings. So in January of this year, the Treasury released their final rule on ARPA funding. But as we said, again, there's been amendments since then and changes that we've kept track of. In February, y'all heard from all the applicants in 2 council work sessions. And then following that, staff met with city council members to gather information and feedback from you all prior to where we are here today. So again, just to review the initial ARPA goals, these are the goals set by the Fed to include responding to the economic and public health impacts of COVID, impacts on our communities, residents, and businesses, and to help provide for an equitable recovery. So as the city was starting to plan for ARPA and recommend the categories that you all would approve for funding, we used several previous engagement efforts to inform those ARPA categories. And those included the recent budget engagement, reimagining public safety engagement, and several others. So you all approved, based on those federal guidelines, the allowable uses and the engagement efforts, you all approved these 10 categories for funding for city and city applications. So, and this is just a reminder too of where we are with the budget. These are already approved ARPA funding expenditures. So there's, we're going to be discussing that 17 million later this morning and the recommendations moving forward. So at this point, I'll take any questions that you have before moving on.
Jamie, question, those categories that was on page 8, I think, federal allowable uses, that hasn't changed. Those were the original guidance and, okay, so the general categories haven't changed.
Right.
Just some of the detailed rules you're going to tell us about that have changed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, Kim is going to go into more detail about the RFP, the evaluation process, and some of those rules that we've been learning as we go, or that as they've come out. Thank you all. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. As Jamie said, I'm Kim Marmon-Sachs. I'm the Arpa project manager. I took over from Patricia Rosenberg, who was the interim project manager, and there was a lot of work done on the RFP process before I actually got here, and I have just been able to pick up with that. The work that was done before actually set us up in really good stead for the RFP process and then the evaluation, so I was able to hit the ground running, and I think what we've done in the meantime has been a very robust process, and we've managed to move on pretty quickly. Now, I know everybody wants us to get to the recommendations, so I'm going to try and make the next part brief. But I think it is important to understand the process that we've gone through, because it has been thorough and it has been detailed, and I know it's taken a while, but I think that that's time well spent, and the structure of it was pretty good. So, as Jamie said, we went through a process at the beginning to go through an RFP process. There was particular principles that we wanted to follow. So I know the city manager and the council went through the process of deciding what our guiding principles were, and we built the RFP to follow those guiding principles. So once the RFP was issued, we had to then go through a process to evaluation. In the first phase, when we were doing the whole categories, working through that process, there was a number of lessons that we learned in the first phase. It was impossible to score weighting categories on their own in a standalone process. It meant that you could, when you were selecting categories, you could score badly on the equity process, but well on the project management process, and then that meant that the scores were skewed. So as we went through the RFP process, we were trying to build questions that would delve deeply into what was required and what the organizations could do, but we also had equity running throughout the whole process, which was also something that was deemed by the feds to be important. So we wove equity throughout. We had a parallel set of evaluation questions designed for objective scoring. And then we tried to make the scoring as objective as we could, given that there was city and community groups and not-for-profits that were applying for these funds. So we had to try and make the process as equitable as we could. So in the process going to the evaluation, we structured questions in the RFP, but a lot of them were things like, how many people would this serve, etc., and that was hard to score. So we had to get some evaluation questions that allowed us to score objectively against the questions that were in the RFP. The rubrics and the scoring system was designed with intentionality so that we could do that objective scoring and make sure that equity was scored capability of projects or organizations was scored. And the evaluators' questions had to be structured to allow us to do the metrics and the scoring behind the scenes. So in the evaluation process, there was ultimately 71 applications that were eligible, that were put through to get scored and evaluated. Overall, I think we got about 80, 81, but a number of them had to be moved out because they were not eligible for one reason or another. So this was the scoring criteria. We did 40% of the council-approved categories were scored on equitable community impact, 40% on the project plan and evaluation, and then 20% on the organizational qualifications. There was criteria created for objective evaluation, and it was the same process for the internal and external applications. There was 13 applications from the city originally. So in this 71, there was 13 applications from the city. On the evaluation team, there was 27 members from different departments within the city at all different levels, and it was a very committed team. Each evaluator had 5 projects to analyze. In fact, actually, each project was analyzed 5 times. The evaluators had many more than that. I was the only consistent person on the evaluation process that evaluated all 71 applications. And then the others were touched at least by 5 times by other evaluators in the process. So this is what happened, is we went through a process, the project scores were analyzed and checked, weighted scoring was run by a script behind the scenes, so the evaluators did not see the final score on any of the processes that they were going through. The quality of the submissions was actually very high, which I'll just move on to here. So we applied the principles of RBA, so we were trying to begin with the end in mind. We were trying to look at those applications based on a successful outcome. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But the quality of the submissions overall was very high. It is notable in this kind of evaluation, you normally get a few that score high and there's a very steep drop-off. In this process that we had, there was no significant drop-off. And we had a lot of people who scored, or a lot of organizations, a lot of applications that scored over 70 points or more, which is very unusual. So I think we're congratulating ourselves on the quality of the quality and the objectivity of the process that we went through, but also that the applications actually came in, were very high and sustained a lot of good results. So as far as the next steps are concerned, this is a key point as we go through. The City of Asheville and the Treasury keep emphasizing this when we go on the School of Government trainings every week. Everything is changing a lot, but one of the things that is emphasized all the time is that the City of Asheville are the sub-recipients of this money. So whoever we give the money to is a sub-recipient of the sub-recipient. So we're in a situation where actually the onus is on us to make sure that the reporting to the Treasury and everything going forward is through us. So this is a partnership with the people that we're giving the money to, ultimately, because it's not a situation exactly the same as other grants that we've done through CDBG. It's much more a partnership that we have to develop, because the scoring, the metrics, the analysis, the reporting that we have to do is fairly intense. And whoever we give the money to, they have to follow that route. So we are going to have a very robust process going forward for monitoring. I think it's great because it gives us an opportunity to build capacity in the community and work with federal funds in a different way. But it is a very unique situation and we have to be aware of that. So the next process is to actually turn to that tracking. Once we've made the decision, we have to work very diligently with the people that get the money to make sure that the tracking and reporting is followed. I think Jamie mentioned it when she was talking originally. We have to follow Treasury rules, but there is Treasury rules and there is North Carolina state rules. And Brad and Erin will also know what we've been going through recently because they butt heads against each other, those rules sometimes, and also the rules change all the time. So there is feedback going back to the Treasury from all the recipients, and then they adjust it. So every time, I've been going on School of Government training every week for the last number of weeks, and every time we go, there is another change to the rules or an adaptation and things like that. So when we get to the recommendations, you will see that some of the things have changed slightly because of that adjustment to the rules. And I'll try and update you as much as I can. So we had the interim final rule, which we were following through 2021. So the RFP, the evaluation, the eligibility that we went through at that point followed those rules. Then we got the final rule on the 6th of January, and okay, that made things easier, clarified some things, lifted some restrictions, added some restrictions in, but at least we had, a 400-page document that kind of gave us more guidelines. But since that point, yeah, there is amendment after amendment after amendment. The last one, which came in on the 1st of April Fool's Day, very aptly, and then we were taught about it. Erin was on the same course as I was with the School of Government on the 5th of April. And it changed a lot from some of the conversations that we had already had with yourselves and the staff and the evaluators. It changed a lot again. So we've had to adjust some of the things, and I can answer any questions on that, and hopefully Brad can help with that too. The risk assessment.
Can I ask a question on that? The county has already made a lot of their funding. What happens if you've made the funding, decision, and then the rule changes, and maybe that funding is no longer, is there a clawback, or is it like you're grandfathered? How does that work?
Buncombe County are finding this a challenge. They are having to rewrite their original contracts that they wrote for the first batch that they did. So we're already on, I think we're on the third batch and a new RFP for Buncombe County. We meet with them regularly, and yeah, there's two things that they're concerned about. One is the time from giving the funds to getting the contracts out seems to be lengthy because there's so many things to go through as they went through it, because they were still in the interim final rule and all sorts of things. So we're having to look at it because they're changing the rules, and the Treasury know, and I think it's getting very frustrating for everybody. But yes, there is some provisions that we can either claw back, or we have to look at renegotiating the contract, which is what Buncombe County are doing, which we're going to try and avoid. But hopefully now the final rule has come out and we've had the adjustments to the final rule. Things will keep changing, but I don't think there will be any major changes, but we'll keep track of it as much as we can.
Yeah, that's my question. Are we, on the scale of 1 to 100, are we 98% sure that they're not going to change it again, or are we still at risk?
Brad, do you have a view on that? I think I would say 85%.
I was going to be optimistic and say 90. I do think that there is a high likelihood we will get some additional amendments, but the range is tightening a little bit. I think that the big hurdle to get over was going from the interim rule to the final rule, which we received that a few months ago, and now we are refining the rule more than drastically changing it. And I think some of those amendments are well-reasoned, but now we're reaching the point where a lot of that has been worked out. There will likely be some additional ones, but having spent this extra time is going to be very beneficial for the city and our process, because we don't have to worry about so many of these changes in the process. So this is timing, as Kim said, well spent.
So, and just one final thing that I just want to talk about is the risk assessment. There is a mandated Treasury risk assessment that we have to do with all the organizations. It is fairly intensive, and we also have developed our own internal risk assessment that we're going to be working with going forward as far as monitoring and reporting is concerned. But it has restricted our ability on some of the applications at this juncture. We think some of the applicants would not get past the risk assessment, but we are just still reviewing it. But that is one of the issues that we have to be aware of, that is come front and center recently with the changes that the Treasury are making. Okay, so actually I'll come to the questions, but I know people have been asking questions along the way.
trying not to get into the weeds too much, because I realize this is your job, but when you say risk assessment, generically, what are you talking about? I mean, is it the ability to fulfill the contract? What?
Yeah, it's an audit. The Treasury one is an audit more on fiscal and organizational capability at this juncture. We want to encourage people to carry on applying for these kinds of funds, so we want to do some capacity building and things going forward. But if they can't pass the initial Treasury assessment, which is mostly fiscal and organizational structure, so new organizations that haven't got any audit trail or anything like that, fiscal audit trail, then yeah, it becomes, they're deeming it to be a financial risk. But we are hoping to work with our applicants to shore them up and make sure that they are able to do the reporting, because obviously they're a partner of ours now and they're a subrecipient of the subrecipient. But yes, it's a fiscal audit.
Okay,
that they're reviewing.
so where the city's looking at options, like maybe a financial agent or something like that,
Yeah.
so that some of the maybe newer organizations can still qualify?
Yes.
We're trying to be.
Yeah. And there is also the revenue replacement bucket, which I don't want to kind of get in the weeds on that, but there is also the revenue replacement that would keep us, keeping everybody monitored the same way, but not have the same onerous requirement to match that Treasury audit and risk assessment. So yeah, we're looking at all the options. There are some options, but for right now, it's become front and center. Okay. Any other questions before we kind of do a drum roll and get to the?
I have a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
If we only fund those who maybe historically have had the most access and process experience that maybe seen the least risk, will we get to the equitable outcomes that we need? And that kind of goes with what I've been curious about myself is, am I confident in the equity scoring and the tool that we used? So I went and looked through analyzing my own, and I signaled support for 9 at the top 16 scored. And I wonder, when can we expect to have those decision support sheets publicly available so the public can see how we use the tool, how we got to this staff recommendation?
I mean, we have the rubrics and the scoring and the evaluation already out there. The more specific detail about what fit into the rules and who did and did not look like they would get past a risk assessment, yes, we can, once the decision is made, I think to go forward for the recommendations, we can make that public. But in answer to your first part of the question, Kim, I think we are in a situation where we have, because of the process with the rubrics and the scoring metrics and the evaluation, we had a significant proportion of the projects came out in the top 40 percentile, as I mentioned, without this drop-off. But we also had a good mix of people who, were kind of experienced people that we've used before with projects and grant money. But there was also there's a lot of people in the final list that are smaller organizations, and that just didn't discount them because even the smaller and the grassroots organizations do have some audit history and some financial history and some setup. It was just, I think there was a couple, which we can talk about as we go through, that were really new organizations. And, looking at it with Brad and Erin, I think we got to the point where we felt that it would be hard to get them passed. But there's a number of them in there that, are newer grassroots organizations that would get past the requirements. So I think we have got a decent mix, and there is still some options. Going forward, because you'll see once we get there, there is still an amount of money that is not allocated based on the place we've gotten to at the moment. And with that money, we could also find another way to support some of those newer groups. That's the issue, is without any history of, financial risk, then we couldn't get them past the Treasury assessment. But, there is some other options.
So there were a couple of questions that I had asked back in February, and I just thought I would check to see if there were updates today. One is, what are we doing right now to bind ARPA funding to staffing contracts so that we can follow up, and when we'll follow up if we have an issue where services that were contracted aren't being provided because of limitations with staffing, so we can redirect those funds and get them back into the community.
Yeah, and I think, and again, that's a point well made, and the process going forward with the monitoring and the reporting is going to be a lot more intense, and part of my job going forward is to manage that process, because we're going to be doing on-site reviews with people all the time and also learning with them. So, if something is not working, we are focusing everything on an RBA, results-based accountability. So, it's going to be, what do you need to achieve success? This is what you put in your application. This is what the contract says. What do you need to achieve success? And we will work with them on that, so that it's not a case of at the end of the quarter, you're not doing what you said you were going to do and it's not working. We hope to be much more proactive,
Sure.
working with the groups to make sure that we're, hopefully we'll get to the point where we're not going to get to that.
Right.
But yes, I think that's a point well made, that, it's a difficult process with grants to make sure people are doing what they said they're going to do, because a lot of the time it's like, here's the money, go do what you need to do, and then we'll assess it after time. And I don't want to be in that situation because of the reporting that we have to do. Then I think we need to be much more on top of that and work with the organizations to make sure that they're achieving what we want them to do.
Thank you. And then another one was for applicants or applications that were providing services around homelessness. Can we get an update on where we're at with the clause similar to working with the county around inclusivity? For example, if the application we know comes from an organization that provides services for men and women, can we include a clause that ensures all individuals in need are served regardless of gender identity?
Yeah, and I think I've been working with Erin on this as far as how we're building the contracts. And there is, again, a lot of processes that we have to go through to build the contract. There is a lot included in there from the Treasury about equity and inclusion. So yes, I'm in answer to your question, I am working with Erin on that, and we are trying to be as robust as we can within the contract to make sure that, if anybody has those contracts, that they honor that kind of inclusion.
Kim, you've mentioned Erin a number of times.
sorry.
Can you say who Erin is?
Yes, sorry.
That's it, no.
Erin Miles from the City Attorney's Office.
Very good. And then the last one, I was looking to see how many City of Asheville applications had risen to the top. One of them is the fourth lowest in the scoring for the decision sheets. And I'm hearing concern from community, will the ARPA funds be another situation of perpetuating a resource scarcity narrative? And so I wondered if staff, all of these applications are suggesting that we need to do important work in our community. But is it possible that staff took an opportunity to identify other funding streams or partnerships for the City of Asheville application, so we're not adding to the scarcity narrative?
Yeah, we had originally 13 applications from the city. We narrowed it down to the top 3. And then there was conversations about public sanitation and litter downtown and the public restrooms. So those two, one of the ones had not scored highly on the evaluation based on the criteria that were in the evaluation, but based on the current narrative about the state of downtown and the requirement for public restrooms, new or remaintained or installed or whatever, that one, the one to do with the public restrooms, came up on the list.
And so did we take an opportunity to consider whether or not we should be applying for hotel occupancy, TDA, TDPF funds for that instead?
I have not been involved in that process, but I can't comment on, kind of other conversations within the city. I mean, as far as ARPA is concerned, then, we've just been concentrating on how these fit into the ARPA process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, shall we get on to the real So this is the recommendation. So we had 17,907,641 remaining to be allocated to subrecipients. This money has to be allocated by the 31st of December 2024, spent by the 31st of December 2026, but allocated by the end of 2024. So I'm just putting that in there so you know. I know that we're trying to get to a decision and we're trying to get these funds out there because obviously they're crucial funds. But, not all the decisions have to be made today. We're going to try and make as many as we can and allocate the funds. But just for your information, that we have got a little bit of time, and as the rules change and adapt and adjust, just keep that in your back pocket that, we have got some time if we need it. We have in discussions recommended that we hold $6 million back for projects outside of the RFP process. It doesn't have to be, but at the moment, that's what, I think in the discussions that we've had, and that's the recommendation, is that we're going to do the $6 million holdback. So that means that there's 11,907,641 to allocate. So, and then this at the moment is based on the new rules and amendments that came out on the 1st of April. The Attorney's Office and myself and the School of Government and the Treasury have gone through what was a 19 applicant shortlist at the time. In the review that we did legally and with the Treasury and School of Government, this list of 17, we are comfortable will get past the rules and regulations that exist at the moment. And so this is the list of the 17. You will notice that it comes to 9,823,000. So it does leave us some in reserve to look at some of the ones that were on the list that have gone off the list because of the risk assessment and things like that, but also to just adjust and adapt to the new rules and regulations. The other comment that I would make is the recommended funding. You will notice that some of them have got partial funding figures against the amount that was actually requested. And again, those have been adjusted because of the new rules and regulations that we had to follow. So there was various things on capital. $1 million threshold was brought in on the capital, any capital projects. If they were above $1 million, then you had to provide justification on 2 other projects that were applied for. The one you were funding, if it was over $1 million, that you could provide justification that it was the better use of funds than the other projects that were on there. So that, they came up with a rationale that we had to do that.
Start that again.
Okay.
You really lost me on that.
Okay.
One, so just help me out. Like, give me an example. Like, you look at Project A and you compare it to Project B, which is the same person as Project A, or just
So
help me
for
out.
example, say on Helpmate's application, that is a $2 million request for capital funding for a shelter for domestic violence victims. So that is above the $1 million threshold. So what we had to do in that situation is that we have to provide a justification to the Treasury that the Helpmate project, with what it's doing within the guidelines of the COVID and Arpa rules and regulations, is it providing the service that we need that is more appropriate than somebody else who was applying for domestic violence funds that were capital based. So is their project more aligned to the categories and the expenditure and the affordable options than Helpmate's was, or is Helpmate more appropriate?
So you have to stay in apples to apples?
Yes.
Okay.
So some of them have changed because of that $1 million threshold, and because of the rules.
Can you tell me, so with the helpmate example explicitly, it was a $2 million ask, the $1 million threshold now 1.5. Is there a $2 million threshold too, or is there a way that they could get to their two?
Yeah, and that's going to be part of the, kind of the next thing. But yes, we can get them, because the list changed and the numbers changed, we're now, at 9 million as opposed to 11 million. So we have got some flexibility, and that was something I was going to discuss with you as we just kind of go through the next piece. But yes, whether there is any on that list that you want to raise. Well, the two that come to mind are whether you want to go with Helpmate up to their $2 million ask, and then the other one was Habitat for Humanity. They had a $900,000 ask. They said that they could do a partial funding, and what their request was at the time was that they had two projects, one that was $600,000 and one that was $300,000. And they asked if we were going to do partial funding, whether we could fund the entirety of one of those projects. In this instance, because they're under the $1 million threshold, you could actually, if you so wished, put them up to the full funding. Everybody else on that list, because of the rules and regulations, their partial funding is what it has to be based on the rules and regulations.
Okay, so tell us again the ones we have flexibility on.
So
You said Helpmate?
Helpmate and Habitat for Humanity.
And that's it?
The only other one possibility is the mediation center. In their ask, they had a set of salaries and operating budgets for the mediation center. They also had salaries and budget for Helpmate and for Our Voice. So that was in, and it's a different project than the shelter, obviously, for Helpmate. But based on the guidelines that we have, again, from Treasury and the School of Government, you have a little bit of flexibility with the mediation center, probably up to about 750,000, but no more.
Okay, question. I'm just a little confused. I was looking here where you were talking about the $1 million threshold for capital improvements, but I was looking at the Helpmate, it's at 1.5, it's the rate, and I'm just trying to sort of figure out how that happened.
Because when we looked at this new threshold of the $1 million and the justification with Helpmate, based on their project that they had put forward, it did actually satisfy the criteria for going over $1 million. So we could justify it against two other projects. So it did actually stand up on its own.
Okay, great.
So Helpmate can. Abccm, we've gone with the 999,950 or 990 because that's under the $1 million. But their project as a whole didn't match up to the justification when we were looking at the new rules. So there was some adjustments that we had to make because of the new rules.
Okay, and Homeward Bound, the same type of?
Yeah, Homeward Bound the same. So the ones that you can see that are 999,990, that was keeping them below the $1 million threshold. Not in a sneaky move or anything like that, just as far as the new rules were concerned, we could justify up to that level, but not over it because their projects didn't match the rules that we needed to do.
And could you maybe give us an idea as to what Helpmate had in their bucket as opposed to the others that actually caused them to score higher?
It was they wanted $2 million to build a domestic violence shelter, and you couldn't separate anything on their project. You couldn't kind of separate anything out to be operations or anything like that. It was entirely for a build of a shelter. So you couldn't separate out the elements, where with Abccm and the other ones, there was a number of elements that made up their project. And, and some of the other elements were more tenuous as far as fitting them into the rules. So it was the safest option to make sure that we were completely within the justification that we could do.
Okay, thank you.
And just for curiosity, what's the ramifications if we make a mistake?
Well, that was,
Brad, do you want?
that was the question about the clawback.
Well, no, I'm saying, like,
You mean
what if the city were to identify a subrecipient, and later on it's determined that it didn't fit the criteria? Then what happens?
When we do the quarterly reports, we have to provide the justification, and it's detailed and fairly intensive. So we have to provide the justifications, and then the Treasury will come back and say whether we've got it right, but we've been pretty thorough. I think, Brad, if you have got any comment, I mean, Brad and Erin from the Attorney's Office, School of Government and Treasury, because we have gone back time and time again and asked the questions about, well, you know, if this, what about that? And then we go on a School of Government training and they say, oh, by the way, new rule, threshold, 1 million. So, you know, we have checked and double checked and we are fairly confident. I would say we are very confident, sorry, not fairly, very confident that what we've got now will get past the justifications.
You know, and Gwen, to tie a bow on that, in a worst-case scenario, like all federal grants, the worst-case scenario is that we would become liable to essentially return the funds to the federal treasury. The monitoring process and the reporting process says you have met those requirements, you're fine. You no longer have to be liable for those funds for not meeting them. So in a situation where we were potentially to go beyond what either state law, the federal guidelines, or some of these individual assessments require, we would potentially expose ourselves to having to pay back that portion of the funds, which would not qualify.
So, I mean, it's a fairly high level, and, you know, you don't want to make a mistake.
It is significant, and I will say it is why we've gone through such an exhaustive process to review these things when we do have so many regulatory schemes to ensure that we are fitting ourselves through, both at the federal and state level, which is, again, is ever evolving. We have really tried very hard not just to review this with multiple departments internal to the city, but throughout the federal process, the School of Government, in order to ensure that what we're giving you is not just something we feel very comfortable with, but that we feel we have pushed the limits as far as we can within those boundaries.
And then just one more question, or one more point to note on the recommendations. The majority of the projects that we have on these recommendations were in the top 40 percentile of the evaluation scoring. You know, a lot of them were in the top 40 percentile, in fairness, because there were so many, you know, good scores. But we are comfortable that the process was robust and that we have, you know, kind of managed within that process to give you recommendations that are safe as we can make them within the rules and regulations, but also within our own process, because it's on a continuum. The RFP, the evaluation, and then now the monitoring and the performance management, you know, to your point. You know, the performance management is the next phase. It's the bit that I'm most passionate about. I like this bit as well, but I'm most passionate about that bit. And I think it's a good opportunity for community groups to work with us, not us telling them how to do things, to work with us and to improve this process. Because this is an unprecedented situation, an unprecedented amount of money. You know, the whole pandemic is just something, you know, once in a lifetime situation, touch wood. You know, so I think we can use this opportunity to build on our process and our performance management and really work with the community to make it as fair, as equitable as we can, but also to build capacity in the situation of federal grants on this level.
Kim, I want to kind of follow up on your statement about the majority of the recommendations were for applications that scored in the top 40%. There's one not on there, and I was just wondering the reason for its exclusion. I'm talking about the PODS request.
Yes.
From the Asheville Housing Authority. Yep. I was wondering if the reason they aren't on there is due to some changes, or if there's another reason. I noticed that they scored 83. And we mentioned earlier that the modernization and upgrade actually was not amongst the top. And I see that had a 75 score. So how do we reconcile, especially when we're repeatedly talking about the achievement gap, not recommending PODS, but we moved something that was amongst the lowest scores up to us for recommendation and consideration.
Yeah, and good point as well. And yes, there was a reason why the PODS came out, because it was one of the 19 originally that we had. There was 2 that dropped out, one because of risk assessment, and then the PODS and the rationale was because the PODS and the application was for remote schooling and things like that during the lockdown, and the focus of their application was very much about the lockdown and the immediate portion after. And I think the value of having remote learning and in the pods, I think, is still relevant, but the way that the application was written was very narrow time frame related to lockdown and the coming out of the lockdown. And with the new rules, that got very tenuous as far as fitting it in. It's not completely out of the frame, but right now with the rules as they are, it didn't make it past the new rules and the new guidelines. But there may be some other ways that we can do that. But that is why originally it was on the list. And until last week, it was on the list. And then last week when we had this new updated rules from the 1st of April, and then we just tried to analyze what was left of the 19, and we went through a legal review, School of Government and federal, and that's what happened. So yeah, so unfortunately they had to drop off, but I wouldn't count them out completely at the moment, but yes, at the moment, that's where we are at.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So early on, I guess the group on here is listed as Mediation Center, but it's originally a 5-group ask. And I met with them early on, and I have heard from them now that this slide is up, that there may be a little communication error because the original ask was for 1.5. And then as you have stated, some of the organizations were able to get funding elsewhere. But my understanding, and I'm sure this can be cleared up after this meeting, is that they were suggesting that there could be a $500 reduction, meaning it would still be $1 million needed. And it appears that it was stated as, we just need 500 now. So just to clarify, they're actually still, I'm hearing that they were still hoping for 1 million.
I think the 500,000 was not because they requested an amount that they could do as a partial funding. It's that they have salaries for Helpmate and Our Voice and things in their list. I know it's a,
Okay.
it's an overall ask and representing 5 different organizations, but because of the funding that's going to Helpmate for a different project, but what happened was it was reduced by the salary, everything for the mediation center that they asked for operating and salaries and things like that stayed in. Everything for Helpmate and Our Voice, I think, was removed again because of the rules and the changes that were in effect. With Mediation Center, we can go up. I think it was to 750,000, if memory serves me correctly. 750,000 we could go up to if that's your choice, because within the rules, we could still bump it up a little bit more.
So what about Pisgah? I noticed you didn't mention them in that list. And then they had another ask that isn't on this list at all. But I want to make sure I understood you correctly first. So you're saying it was actually regulatory things and changes that reduce it to the 5,
Yeah.
not their request
Yes.
to pull back on some. Okay.
Yeah,
And
but you
then-
can go up with them a little bit. I think if memory serves me correctly, it is 750,000. We may have a little bit more play in that because we had to drop some of the things out that didn't work with the rules.
And what was pulled from Pisgah? Also salaries and,
I think Pisgah was the Pisgah Legal Services were salaries for 2.5 people, I think, and I'd have to go back and have a look at the budget more specifically, but we may have some flex with that.
okay.
But not up to $1 million. I think we looked at it, it was, I think 750 was the max, but again, that's within your remit to adjust that if you want to.
Because I also noticed that Pisgah had a separate ask of the group that was more like rental assistance and staffing and stuff, and it didn't make the cut either, right?
No, it wasn't on the original group of 19, which was our shortlist. And the original group of 19 on our shortlist did get to us to the 11.9 million, which we were looking at. And then just this last week, we have made the changes down to this. So we still have that 2 million, which I'm just going to kind of mention on the next slide. We still have that 2 million to decide what to do with.
In just process-wise, are we trying to discuss some changes to this, or are we trying to do that by May? I'm just wondering
So process-wise, which you'll get to at some point in this presentation, but what I would expect is that when we move this forward to council, it'll be a resolution with a recommended group, it could be this group. However, if there is not consensus around 1 or 2 or 3, they can be pulled out for a separate vote. So kind of like you would do a consent agenda. That would be the idea, not necessarily go through each one and vote it up or down. Try to have a majority of it as a recommended package.
And then if there were some that say didn't make this list, but we wanted to consider adding some back, we have until May, or are we trying to do that today?
We're gonna try to do, I think we need to give some feedback today. So if we, if we're looking at this list and we wanna change some of the funding, like if we wanted to bump the mediation centers back up to 750, which I think is the max you said we could do, or helpmate up to 2 million, we need to have that discussion here and indicate that support. Or if there's something you wanna, change your mind, you want to take off this list or whatever. Or if there's something that didn't make this list and you want to add it back in, this is the time to say that. So we can get as much of this gelled up as possible here.
So for example, I had signaled in my decision sheet a maybe for the restroom facilities, which I think we should seek other funding for. And I would signal support here to remove that partial support, because we haven't yet seen the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on evictions. We're just beginning to see the beginning of that, and I'm really concerned. So I would appeal to my colleagues to support application 44 for Pisgah Legal to address eviction.
If I could just make one comment about that. If the ones that we analysed legally were the 19 that were on the list. So you have, of course, the option to bring some more onto the list, but we would need to go through the same legal jeopardy to kind of actually look at all of those ones. So, and pulling up any more onto the list at this juncture, we would need a little bit more time. So for the May the 10th situation, I think what we were recommending is that we get to agreement on any of these 17. You can take some off, obviously, but these have all been vetted. So we are comfortable that these ones fit. That is not to say at all that you can't add any more in, because we have $2 million at the moment, over $2 million to still allocate. So they, if you want to bring some others onto the list, by all means, but we need to do the legal vetting to make sure that they are, under the new rules, eligible.
Can I ask a point of clarification? Is the bathroom item on here? Is that covered under litter and cleanliness?
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right here.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong. Shanika, you led me astray. Okay, all right, so, all right. So I think one other point of clarification in terms of process, and especially given the work that's going to be required to review anything that's not on this list, we'll need to indicate a majority support to ask staff to do that for that particular item. So they're not just.
Well, I'll
chasing
go ahead and
windows, right?
support Councilwoman Roney's suggestion regarding evictions. And,
For Pisgah Legal.
For Pisgah Legal.
As will I. I was going to make the same suggestion.
Okay, so
Yeah, I
that's number 44. We don't have the
And
extended.
also, I'm in agreement with that
Me as well.
particular suggestion by Kim.
If we, Brad, if we have one more that we need to look at, can we review it before May the 10th? If there is agreement amongst the council for that?
Are you asking about the timing issue?
Yeah, I'm just asking if we can legally vet
Yes.
it.
Yeah, that's not going to be a problem. If we have a handful that we need to review, we can absolutely dedicate the resources needed to get that done in a timely manner. If we end up having to go back through everyone, it might be a difficult proposition, but I think 2 to 5 is not going to be a problem for us to go through.
Can I get
Just because it's-
clarification? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just, because mine is written in like ridiculous, how much is the Pisgah request? I can't find it on my.
It's $1,003,48,650. Or
Which
was the
will
original
probably
ask?
face that 1 million cap.
Well, the million cap is on capital, so it depends how much of that is capital.
None of it.
Okay, so if none of it is capital, then the million cap is not this. It doesn't have the same rules and regulations if it's not capital.
So I want to clarify, I do support having that one looked at for applicability again. I don't support what I think might have been the first part of that, which was to remove the restrooms in exchange for. And I want to make sure I understand what is written on here, because modernization and upgrade of downtown restrooms doesn't necessarily mean Portland Loo. Is it to mean that we may look at a port and lieu versus getting another existing restroom up 24/7 or a?
I think we changed the title of it. It was the Portland Loo originally, because there was a lot of conversations about whether it was 2 Portland Loos,
Right.
1, or whether we were going to do 1 and upgrade some of the other facilities. So we just made it as a modernization, but it is the Portland Loo application.
And to clarify, the bathrooms are absolutely needed in downtown, especially 24/7 restroom facilities. If, my intention was to offer another opportunity to move support if it's needed, because it seemed to me that's the one where we could seek other partnership funding.
Yep, we actually have a meeting scheduled today to talk to the TDA. So I'm glad to bring that up and see what the viability of that is. But so I guess I'm not hearing for now, removing that item.
For me, it depends.
No, I mean not to remove, to leave it on the list. Oh, did you want to remove? Okay.
So if we're gonna get to a place where I have to choose between the two, that's what I'm wondering about. So I wouldn't be in a position to say remove it or not until I hear what the research yields.
Okay, so officially that one's in play. We'll just leave it there.
And I think it depends on the additional ones that you all want us to consider, because there's still a $2 million.
That's what I thought. There's
Yes,
still
there's
2
still
million,
$2
not
million.
part of that 6 million.
That's correct.
So it could be
Yes, ma'am.
possible to do both.
That's correct.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
So I just moved to the next slide because, this recommendation is for $9 million. There is remaining funds of $2 million. So, so we could keep the restrooms in and we could still do Pisca Legal if it passes all the various checks, or we could, this amount of remaining funds has to be decided on by the end of 2024. So,
Well,
I know we're trying to get to the point where we can vote on them, but yes, if we can bring Pisca Legal in, if you want to take off depending on conversations that happen, if you want to take off the bathrooms, then we can adjust that figure.
Well,
So
let me ask you all a question. So they're going to go look at this item for Pisca Legal, which is 1.4-ish. So that would eat a good chunk of this, almost 2.1 million. But let me ask you guys about the reduction in funding. It looks like for YMI, we don't have flexibility on that one. Litter and cleanliness, the city's going to look at some other resources, through contracting. And then, but what about helpmates being reduced to 1.5, and the mediation centers being reduced to 500, and the Habitat one being reduced? Is there any interest in I just want to know in terms of our funding, moving those
I'm
back
curious about the
up?
helpmate.
Yeah, I am interested in moving helpmate back to 2 million, but we've got this 2 million-ish.
yeah,
So,
I support that. This is Kim, moving that back up to 2 million.
yeah, and anyone else supportive of moving helpmate back to 2 million?
I'm supportive of moving help back to 2 million, but I believe that Pisca Legal needs to go through the process that everybody else went through. First of all, we asked all organizations if they were to take partial, what that amount would be. So I think that's the first thing, because I believe that the 1.3 that Pisca is asking for is like a 3-year funding. It's multi-year funding. So I think we need to start them where we started everybody else, so that we can determine if we'll need the full 2 million to cover.
yeah. I spoke to everybody about partial funding. We asked on the RFP initially if anybody could take partial funding, if they would put it on their RFP, and a number did. And then subsequently, when we narrowed the list down, I then spoke to everybody to see whether their projects would still be successful if they had partial funding. So yes, with all these on the list, I have had a conversation with them. But yes, with Pisca Legal, I would need to have that conversation.
So it looks like there's majority support to move helpmate back to 2 million. What about the mediation center funding? I think you said it could go up to as much as 750. council, any interest in making that
This is the
change?
VOCA, the victims of crime issue, right? So as long as there hasn't been some situation in the community that they've found a supplement for that income, then, or that lost revenue, I'm also in support of increasing it.
I'm in support of moving it back.
No,
to
I'm running the numbers here. So the number, if we have almost 2.1, the difference would be, if you move, helpmate, $500,000, that's $500,000. If you move, the mediation center, that's another $250,000. So
Yes.
that's seven.
So you're out of money right there.
If you fully fund PISGA, is that what you're assuming?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that gets you, so I think that's what staff needs to know. So when they're evaluating the PISGA application, they need to know whether council is supportive of moving any of these other numbers so they can make it all work. I mean, we're close, we're pretty close. So, I mean,
We haven't gone over though, right? So we've got,
well, Gwen, you're assuming we're fully funding the PISGA at 1.4, right?
I must be missing something because it works for me at 1.3. We have 500 considered to helpmate, 250 from the 500 to 750 for mediation center, 1.3 million for
PISGA.
potential
So that's
PISGA.
That's 50,000 over.
thought PISGA was $1 million.
1.2 or something. I guess we don't have it in front of
Do we
us, I'm
know?
sorry.
Let
me see if I have the
your sheet, see if
original.
I can read it. Can you read it? I don't know.
It's
I've got it here.
1.348650.
There it
Okay,
is,
there we go.
1.384.
And maybe that's $1 million. I
It's
mean, a partial
$14,000
funding.
difference.
I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
so we could partially fund I mean, I have to go through the conversation and we have to check it legally. But, we could do partial funding for PISGA, which would at least help them, there is very few that we have gone over $1 million on, but there is some. So, it just depends on, what's exactly in there. And we need to run it against the new rules, because that was not run past the new rules. But yes, we can of course do that.
I want to make sure we thank you for your brain power on this.
It changes every day. It's not my brain power. I think that reduces every day, but yeah. Okay, so any more conversation on that? Let me just get through to, I think that's pretty much, so this is, the kind of, that's where we're at. So we're talking about this 2 million, and then, with the suggestions that we've talked about today, then that would get us closer to, kind of funding everything. So
Are we saying anything about the 6 million holdover? Like, are we sharing what it might be for, what we're thinking about, or we're just holding it in case?
I think we're just holding it because there is a number of different things on the offing, but we took the 6 million out of this RFP process just because of other things that was discussed, low barrier shelter, various other things. So that is a decision for another time. So at this juncture, I think it's just acknowledging that we're holding the 6 million back and, kind of going forward with the remaining amount.
Just to confirm, we're still holding funds for Memorial Stadium, right?
That's exactly what I was getting ready to
Okay.
say, Kim. I
Good, good.
appreciate that. 2
Yes,
million.
that 6 million is, Memorial Stadium, low barrier shelter, that kind of thing. We haven't finalized that situation yet, but yes, that's what it's being held for.
Okay, so to summarize, what I'm hearing our direction is to ask staff to explore the PISGA legal ask, line item 44 on our other spreadsheet, and determine what level of eligibility it has, and then to increase the helpmate amount to 2 million and the mediation center amount to 750. And then I will, and Deborah and I think you're in my meeting today, but we will have a conversation about the bathroom item and see what other funding opportunities are possible.
I have one more question before we try and
Well,
summarize.
did I get that right, is what I want to ask you? Are we nodding to staff to please put it together like that if you can?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have a question just about a particular application, and I know I had sent some questions ahead of time, but it's kind of in the weeds and I'm just not clear still. And it's about this last item on the list, which is the Transformation Village for Abccm. Originally a $3 million ask, now a $1 million because of the capital. But I'm still unclear on the use of that fund. And I know I've sent a lengthy email, but what I understand that project to be, and I would love for someone to help me understand if I'm correct in this analysis, is that it's a 5-building project, 5 different buildings, each costing about $3 million or so. It's a $22 million project.
Yes.
And the ask of us is to fund $3 million, or in this case, capping it at 1, for one particular building. So I had reached out to the applicant to say, just generally, personally, I'm a little concerned about our capacity as a community. Can we, we're already challenged to take care of our own folks here, and we have some agencies in our community that do a great job, such a great job that other people are relocated here to receive those services. And I wasn't clear on this particular application if it is actual services that will be provided for our local folks in need, or if it is like some of this organization's other projects where folks are sometimes our folks or sometimes from other areas. And while we want to help as many people as possible, of course, I'm just kind of hesitant because I don't quite understand that entire project. And I wasn't sure if staff had been able to figure anything out, or if the onus is on us and I just need to dig in further.
I mean, I saw your email, and we have also reached out to them to get a question answered. I think the view was that we could maybe put something in the contract that, the same with Mountain Biz Works, that it has to be for people from the city of Asheville. But I haven't got a clear answer on that at the moment. So I would share your concerns or confusion about exactly how they're going to monitor that, and how are they going to stipulate that it has to be our own that we're taking care of.
Is there a similar provision for the contracts for the funds we already essentially pre-allocated for other organizations that provide services for those who are unsheltered?
Yeah, so, every piece of funding for Arpa, the Arpa funds, even the stuff that was decided before the RFP went out, then they are going to follow the same we have to use the same monitoring and reporting process, because that's what we have to do to the Treasury. So they will follow the same monitoring and reporting, even though they've already been funded, and there are other organizations that are wraparound and things like that. So I don't know.
But I think you're talking about requirements
for
Yes.
Homeward Bound and
Yes.
okay, as Abccm.
Yeah. So any of the funds, even the $6 million holdback fund, any of that, everybody has to go through the same monitoring and reporting process and the same compliance, because we have to as the subrecipients. So, so regardless of when it was allocated and what the funds are, we're still going to go through exactly the same performance management and monitoring and reporting for everybody.
And just for clarity, is there a desire of council to say that for these services, a certain percentage has to be for local residents, either City of Asheville, Buncombe County, whatever?
I don't know how we can make that possible, because if we apply it to all of our applications, I don't think none of them will come up to par.
Right.
I'm not sure if that's gonna work.
Exactly.
And let me, maybe I can rephrase my concern.
Just trying to clarify.
Yeah, let me rephrase my concern, and maybe I'll just put the onus on us, and if my colleagues could assist me in that and researching this project. What I see is a project for $22 million to build 5 buildings. Wonderful. They did email us back and say what the need is in our community. It was about 70 mothers and family. But this housing project is going to build about 400 beds. And most of it is funded by other organizations already. So they have the money to build hundreds, and we need about 70 families. So I'm just not sure. And if you look back at those emails, maybe I'm interpreting it incorrectly, but I just have lingering concerns.
I mean, I think what you're pointing out is the challenge around being a regional hub and providing services regionally. I mean, obviously you have consolidation of service provision. Every single county in North Carolina isn't going to have, a full helpmate shelter or a full whatever. It's just not how it's going to function, and it doesn't make sense financially. But there is a line between, are we actually getting in the business of, almost from an economic development standpoint, of providing the service beyond our region, and where is that line, and how do you evaluate that? I wonder if there's a way to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive to understand with that number of beds, just how broad the service would be, what the expectation would be around that. and what kind of impact that could have on other service providers in the area. So,
Particularly
I mean,
exit,
it's
yeah.
worth having a conversation, trying to understand that a little bit better.
It comes to me like the exit strategy of those as well, because if it's temporary housing, and then, are we helping folks and then bringing them to the community? And we just already have a housing crisis. It's just many layers I don't quite understand yet.
And I get your general approach to the conversation, but specific to Transformational Village, I'm accounting this population with possibly being attached to, associated with domestic violence escape. So in that sense, we would reach, have a regional approach and not local service.
And Mayor, can you elaborate just a little bit more on your thought process regarding the possible impacts it could have on other providers? What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if folks require additional services beyond just housing, which may be the case, can we regionally support that? I mean, we only have only have so much capacity.
I guess what I'm asking is, how is that different from any other entity providing similar type services?
Well, it's not, it's just a matter of scale. I mean, if it's 400 beds, that might, I don't know what kind of impact that would have, as opposed to, say, 50.
The example I would use is that upon exit, are they giving a housing voucher, which we know we have a 2,000 person wait list for? So then, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think in their RFP response it's an 8-page application, so the detail is not there, and I think we do need to understand it more. Whether we remove them from the list temporarily whilst we do that investigation, I think that's a conversation that.
I don't support
my
necessarily
favorite.
removing them, but I would love additional
Okay.
research and information and impacts.
And remind me, the county, I think, this is one of the ones they did allocate some funding to as well.
Yes, they did. And that's another good point, is we have looked at the county funding. We work closely. We have Jamie and I have a bi-weekly meeting with the county. So we kind of, and because the rules keep changing and they're in a worse situation because of their having to rewrite contracts and things because of the law changes or the rule changes. But we do, kind of confer with them and try and come up with mutually beneficial kind of arrangements with how we're kind of funding and stuff like that. So we are trying to just be conscious of what the county are doing as well, so that we're kind of, with the capacity building and the monitoring and stuff like that, we all have the same onus on us to report. So we're trying to work together to help with that capacity building and things as well.
I was just wondering, I know that as far as the Dogwood basically funding, the consultant that comes in to sort of evaluate, I'm just wondering if that particular evaluation, how far and how extensive it is, and that way we'd be able to get more information as to what we're dealing with here. So do you know when that's going to be actually take place, or?
I don't know when the study will be completed. I would imagine probably early fall, late fall. It might be earlier, we hope. Essentially, that assessment will be, what are our existing facilities? And what is the gap? What is it from a, best practice as it relates to providing housing services, particularly related to those that are unsheltered. What would be the best practice, and do we have that? And is it adequate?
Yes,
In terms of the, right.
And that was the reason why I was thinking, depending on how expansive that study could be, it could actually give us more insight to the things that we're discussing now.
Yeah, I think definitely we will have more information about the current services, what our needs are,
Exactly.
and what our capacity
And
is
moving forward, yes, for sure.
that exists today.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything further from you all, or?
I don't think so. I think, the next steps is, obviously, we'll take the feedback from today and look at fiscal legal and change the numbers. And then we'll just try and get it ready to make final recommendations at the May 10th meeting. And any other questions, if I find out any more information about anything, I'll let you know. But I just think it's been a robust process. I know it's been lengthy, but, there is a lot of things that we've had to look at behind the scenes in this kind of unprecedented situation. But we are trying to work on a continuum. So the RFP worked into the evaluation, worked into this decision-making, and then we'll go to the monitoring afterwards. And I think that the process has been successful so far. I think the applications were of a very high quality. And I think this is a great opportunity for us as a city to make sure that the next stage matches that continuum. So, but I think we're in a good place with these decisions at the moment. And then if any others need to come into play, then we will just go through the same analysis as the horizon changes constantly.
I'd like to, I was just going to say, I just really like to thank her because, believe it or not, she brought a lot of things, sort of clarified a lot of things where before I was just sort of all over the place. And so I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate us being able to get those guidelines before we put anything out there because that could have been really messy here. So I'm grateful for that and thank you so much.
Yeah, so thanks for slow walking that.
Yeah.
It's the one time it's like, good, slow down. We did the right thing.
It's been an interesting challenge. I know that, every time we're involved in any of the training or anything like that, it's not another new thing we have to try and accommodate. So, and I really appreciate the help that the City Attorney's Office has given me in trying to get through the legal questions because they are many and complex.
Well, and thank you all to you and your team and all the people that reviewed these applications. And Jamie, I mean, it just a tremendous amount of work. So thank you for making our decision-making process a little smoother and easier. And thanks to all the applicants. I know we have some folks here today that represent some of the applicants. I know it's a lot of work and we can't fund everything. I wish we could. But, thank you for working in our community and figuring out how to make the best use of these funds. So we appreciate it. And with that, we're adjourned.